Ladies and gentlemen, glad to meet you all virtually. I wish I could be with you in Dubai for this event. And welcome to today's hybrid webinar on empowering refugees through employability. We have the privilege of introducing three extraordinary individuals who have dedicated their lives to creating positive change in the world. Joining us today are Khaled Hosseini, a master storyteller whose narratives transcend borders, Mahroukh Mirzayi, an exceptional advocate for human rights and women's empowerment, and Dr. Michelle Jasmine Demasi, a tireless advocate for refugees and human rights. Khaled's captivating novels have resonated with readers worldwide, while Mahroukh's relentless dedication has made a lasting impact. Dr. Michelle Jasmine Demasi's extensive research and advocacy shed light on critical issues faced by refugees. This topic is particularly close to my heart. My wife and I left Kabul, Afghanistan in June of 1984 at the height of the Soviet invasion, and we fled to Pakistan. We arrived in a border town in Pakistan in the Northwest Territory after more than 48 hours of walking under cover of darkness to avoid gunships and military patrols. While waiting for our resettlement to the US, I worked for the US Refugee Services and subsequently for a brief period of time in Los Angeles for a resettlement agency in 1985. Here's what I observed. In the face of numerous challenges, including displacement, limited opportunities, and a lack of resources, refugees are seeking pathways towards self-reliance and independence. Today's webinar aims to explore innovative approaches and practical solutions to empower refugees, equipping them with the skills and opportunities needed to rebuild their lives and improve outcomes for the refugees and their host communities. Be prepared for an enlightening discussion filled with inspiring stories, valuable insights, and actionable strategies as we strive to create a brighter future for refugees worldwide. Khaled Hosseini, we would love to hear your insights on the current landscapes for refugees. What are you seeing on refugee numbers and their origins through your work with UNHCR and the Foundation?
Khaled, does he know he's on mute?
I think
no problem.
Thank you, Akbar John. I appreciate your introduction, and I appreciate being part of this event. As a former refugee myself, I appreciate the event's goal to highlight the voices of refugees and to highlight not only the challenges but the innumerable contributions that they have made historically. It's important to note that the numbers I'm going to give you around global displacement are bound to change. The Global Trends report will come out in the middle of June and will update the numbers I'm about to give you. Although I don't have sight of that data, I think it stands to reason that given the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the new conflict in Sudan, that the economic recession and the impact of the climate crisis, that the numbers will go up as they have reliably over the last decade. But looking at the global picture, there are now over 103 million people around the world who are displaced. And frankly, this is a staggering number. It represents 1% of humanity, and it means that 1 out of every 78 people is now forcibly displaced because of war, persecution, or conflict. 103 million is a sobering and alarming number, and it stands at the highest level since we began officially recording human displacement. And it's unfortunately, in my mind, a searing indictment of the government's and the international community's inability to resolve conflict, to end persecution, and to address adequately the various underlying reasons, be they economic, political, or natural, why innocent people abandon their homes and flee. Of the 103 million, 53 million are internally displaced people. These are folks, these are IDPs, folks that have remained within the borders of their home state, their home country, and they make up the majority of the forcibly displaced population we're seeing around the world in places like the DRC, like Colombia, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. 32 million and a half of the 103 million are refugees, meaning these are people who've actually crossed an international border. And the rest are asylum seekers, they're stateless groups, and they're smaller groups who are in need of international protection. It's sad to me that over half, nearly half, I should say, of all displaced populations, be they stateless, IDPs, or refugees, are women and children. And this is particularly alarming because, as I'm sure the audience is aware, women and children run the risk of suffering sexual violence, of being kidnapped, of being trafficked, of being forced into marriage. In many countries where armed groups and criminal networks roam the countrysides and act with impunity, the transit journey from home to safety is particularly dangerous for women and children. And so it's important to recognize this vast disparity, and governments and groups that are working on displacement need to make sure to include women's voices and have them included at the table, recognizing that they are in fact disproportionately affected. If you actually look at where these populations are coming from, you realize that the challenges of human displacement touch all corners of this world, from the Middle East to South America to South Africa, highlighting just how widespread and complex the nature of the crisis actually is. But that being said, the majority of refugees, to the tune of 72%, really come from 5 countries today, from Ukraine at just over 8 million, with Venezuela at just over 7 million, Syria at just under 7 million. Afghanistan has 5.2 million people who are refugees, asylum seekers, or people who are living in refugee-like situations. And South Sudan has 2.3 million. I would be remiss not to mention the Myanmar situation, where the Rohingya minority represent about just under 1 million refugees. And of course, the new conflict in Sudan has displaced 1.4 million people, 1 million of them internally, with the other some 350 million people seeking refuge in neighboring countries. So these are roughly the numbers and the demographics of the displaced population in a very rudimentary way. And again, these figures, I think, will be updated come June 13th. But if you look at where people are actually fleeing to when they leave their homes, a familiar pattern emerges. Most refugees, in fact, about 70% of them, flee to and reside in neighboring countries, in countries neighboring their own. In fact, 5 countries in the world host the bulk of refugees. That's Turkey, it's Germany, it's Colombia, it's Pakistan, and it's Uganda. So you can see mostly low and middle income countries end up hosting the bulk of the world's refugees. A dramatic, I think, a dramatic example of that was Lebanon, where at the height of the Syrian war, 1 out of every 4 people walking the streets in Lebanon was a Syrian refugee. Now, Lebanon, like Uganda or Jordan, is a small country that's struggling with its own resources and its own socioeconomic issues, all of which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a lot to ask a developing country to absorb such large numbers of people, sometimes a significant fraction of their own population, oftentimes over a span of days, or weeks, or months. And this highlights something I wanted to impress on the audience, and I'll leave with that, if nothing else, is the need to think of displacement as a global issue, and not as a series of local challenges to be met by neighboring countries. There's an urgent need for the international community to shed this kind of fortress mentality and step up. Refugee protection, refugee solutions are a collective responsibility of the international community. They require a collective response, a collective commitment to addressing the root causes of displacement, and a collective commitment to sharing the workload with those countries, those host countries that are at the front line and facing the brunt of the population displacement, and to lend them economic, logistical, and material support as we work towards long-term and durable solutions for millions of people who are today living in limbo. I'll leave it at that, but if there are questions later, I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks, John. I mean, 103 million people displaced, that's a staggering number, and it turns it to a global issue. And then I listened to the number that you shared with us about Afghan refugees, 5.2. Back in 1984, I remember there were over 5 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan, and then more in Iran and in Europe. It's so disheartening to see that 40 years later, we still have displaced people from there, but I'll just leave it there. Mahroukh, we are very grateful for you joining us today. Could you please take a moment to share your personal experiences as a refugee? We would love to hear your story, what you faced along the way, and any significant success you achieved.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mahroukh Mirzayi. I have been born in Jerome, in a very rural village of Afghanistan, in a big illiterate family with 12 siblings. My parents, despite being uneducated, they were working hard as a farmer in inspiration to make a better life for all of us. But due to the poverty and underdevelopments of our rural village, my life often was difficult, with a few opportunities for education, but lots of hard work instead. When the school was established in the first time in our village, I was very excited, but my parents, for searching financial opportunities, they moved to the center of the city, and I remember I just joined the school in city center, and we had to wear uniform, but I and my sister was using the same uniform because we didn't have the money to buy 2 sets. Finally, I finished my education with best score, which was 99.8%, which was not a prize by my parents because they were thinking the education and studies are not a priorities for a girl. After that, and going through all this instability and also inequality in the community, I was thinking I should be someone to rise and also voice the concern and problems, or those who that they are unable to voice and raise them themselves. Then after graduation, I have joined Badakhshan Civil Society as active member as a lobby or advocate, and then I have started working with national and international organization, and currently I was working for 2 years with United Nations and supporting Afghan undocumented Afghan returnees that they were deporting from Pakistan and Iran. Unfortunately, the situation in Afghanistan worsened, and the Taliban gained the control, making life increasingly challenging. And they were imposing restricted rules for women and severely limiting our freedom and suppressing our abilities. It became unbearable for me to endure such oppression. During this difficult time, I thought I should leave country maybe for a while to continue my plan and goals, and which the high risk is not for what I have like the affiliation. And in this difficult times, even I have received many life threats, and I was reaching the organization and agencies that I was working with them, but unfortunately, repeatedly, I was receiving rejection. And yeah, I was thinking that my appeals are ignored. As we all know, leaving one's home is a very difficult experience, especially when it means leaving everything behind and embarking a new journey in a very distant place. I can see nobody willingly choose to leave their home and also their beloved ones. After endorsing 2 long years under the oppressive Taliban regime, I never lost hope, and I continue to support those Afghans that they were deported from Iran and Pakistan. And then I was looking for ways to get out, because it was really challenging. One day I come across a website which was Stalin Beyond Boundaries, and I have seen it was written that they are referring migrants, link them with employers. Then I filled the form, but I didn't have many like hope, because I was aware of the demand. But to my surprise, they have contacted me in the first week, and they were asking me, Fragment is looking for a paralegal, immigration paralegal, if I'm interested. Then fortunately, I passed the interview and I got the offer. But still, I was uncertain due to my nationality and due to the current changes in Afghanistan that I could receive a visa or not. But fortunately, after 5 months, we have received our visa, and we come to a safest place, to UK. This all sacrifice which I made and all these challenges which I faced, they only made me stronger, and I'm very thankful from those who that they have supported me in this very difficult chapter of my life. And as a refugee, when you come to a new country, all the problems and challenges that you have is not solved, and it's rising day by day, especially the integration and adaptation in a new host country. It could be significantly challenging. Language barriers, hindering communication and connection, while cultural differences require open mindset and appreciation for diversity. Adapting to even unfamiliar system and routine could be overwhelming, because we were experiencing some things like very basic in Afghanistan. But however, I determined to success and integrate it in participating the culture events and programs, language classes, and community events. Building connection with friends, local refugee groups, and also other Muslim communities in UK. And also, as a refugee, it's not only these challenges. Despite all challenges, I have achieved significant milestones and celebrate success that they have shaped my life now. And I have found stability, secured employment, becoming a bridge between cultures, and enriching community, and also establishing, as we all know, establishing stability in a foreign land take resilience and determination. But by hard work, I can say we can overcome these all problems. And I can say by hard work, we can celebrate the diversity. And I hope one day we could see that work of refugees are valued, and they even I can see there that we all can live as an integral in a common host community. Thank you.
Mahroukh, thank you. You know, it's very commendable and inspiring to see what you have done despite all the, you know, challenges that you have. one point that you made that it really resonates with me. Leaving your country, your home, that's a very big decision. It's a tough one. And then, getting resettled. And people think that once you resettle, all the problems will go away. That's not true. There's so much to do when it comes to resettlement that people ignore. And incoming refugees and immigrants, they get disappointed because they don't know what to expect. They think that, okay, once I land, it's a totally different life. Yes, totally different life, but still can be very challenging without the right support. So that being said, Michelle, based on your valuable experience at Maximus, we would like to understand the challenges you have observed when it's come to removing barriers to employment for refugees and also building upon their strengths. Additionally, could you elaborate on the role of collaboration in impacting outcomes?
Great, thanks Akbar, I'd be happy to. And I think Mahroukh really picked up on what I'd like to talk about today. I think it's probably really important for our listeners and for our audience to understand what Maximus has been doing. For over several decades, we have been helping refugees into sustainable and into meaningful employment. And we take a really holistic approach when we do that. Most of these programs that we have delivered have been what we would technically call welfare to work programs, where refugees are receiving welfare, they may be receiving social security, and they need to be moved from the welfare system into work. I think it's really critical to consider with that most refugees do not want to be on welfare, and there seems to often be this discourse that refugees have come and they're going to be on welfare and they're taxing on the community. This is never really the case. Refugees actually want to contribute to society and to the economy, and it always brings back some memories of some years back when I met a group of newly resettled Afghan men who'd come to Melbourne in Australia, and they said to me at the time, "We've been told we're to take this money from the Australian government, but Miss Michelle, this is haram, we can't take this money. This is for the people that actually need it." And I said, okay, well, thank you for that. But when we look at how to put refugees into work, and Mahroukh really pointed out, some of the different barriers that people do have. So obviously, being in a new country, not knowing the language, issues around maybe access to transport, physical issues, there may be mental health, trauma, counselling that's needed. So we work with the individual to look at all of these problems or barriers so that we can overcome them. And I turn to some of the research we've done in Australia with Maximus. We did look at what was happening with migrant and refugee communities. And what was really quite an interesting point that came out of that research was that when we looked at 68% of migrants and refugees who were seeking employment had been on welfare, they were taking about 1 year to get into jobs, while their Australian counterparts, Australian citizens who were on welfare, 72% of those respondents said it took less than around 6 months to get a job. So why are we seeing that disparity there? Why is it 1 year versus the 6 months? Well, the findings found that it was around English. So English and being able to learn English is a critical factor in people being able to sustain and find work. So some of the programs that Maximus has done in Australia, for example, has been on our C program, which is looking at skills for employment and education, and also AMEP, which is Adult Migration Education Program. So some of those sorts of programs are ones that can actually really help move people into the workplace. It's also found that when people actually are employed, they learn English quicker. So we're actually, by employing people, we're actually helping them through that process. And employment is a way in which they really want to integrate into society. Akbar, you asked me a little bit about collaboration as well, and also on strengths of refugees. So I'll tackle the collaboration part first. On collaboration, Maximus, we've been working with resettlement agencies. We've worked with, for example, different organisations that are supporting refugees, and also with Host International. For example, they were doing a lot of career counselling with newly arrived Afghans that had left Afghanistan during the recent collapse in 2021. So looking at how we're part of the community and working with other agencies. And then on the strengths of refugees, I think, you know, in my years of working with refugees, one element always stands out, one characteristic, which has been about people's resilience. People often forget the resilience of refugees. And by no means I want to glorify the refugee experience, because I don't wish that upon anyone. But what I have seen over the years, that people have very, very strong levels of resilience. And I often think, you know, I've worked a lot with refugees who've arrived by boat to places like Christmas Island in Australia and to parts at Lampedusa and Sicily. And I think how someone managed to get that far and navigate multiple different countries and different systems and not know the language and still not give up hope and manage to, you know, always have faith in their level of resilience to make it to a new country. I mean, these are people we want to hire. These are people we want to give jobs, right? So hopefully that sort of answers your question.
No, thank you. I mean, not giving up hope. I'm just, you know, thinking about 80s, you know, as a very young person with my wife living, you know, our home country. Now I think about it, it was all about, you know, having a positive, you know, outlook and a hope that, you know, made it happen. And also, you mentioned welfare benefits. You know, there is a common misperception that, you know, people come to collect welfare. I haven't seen that. I've seen, you know, we have extended family, friends, other refugees, and I'll give my family's experience. Michelle, when we arrived in March of 1984, we got on welfare program designed for refugees we stayed about 2.5 months. And what caused us to make that jump was that, you know, one day, my wife and I went to a grocery store and used food stamps. Back then, we didn't have electronic benefits. It was literally food stamps. And we gave it to the cashier, and both of us thought that the entire world stopped and they were watching us using food stamps. And we promised to each other that we'll go and get a job. Doesn't matter, any job, but we'll not stay on benefits. So that being said, Khaled, building on what Michelle mentioned, we would love to hear a personal story or experience from you that resonates with the challenges and positives she highlighted. Please feel free to share any reflections you have on her insights.
Well, I mean, I really want to chime in on what Michelle said. I want to thank her for saying that, because I think there's a propensity, and I live here in the United States, but there's a propensity to think of refugees as sort of this monolithic community of neediness. And in fact, it's very far from the truth. I grew up with my family around the sort of this refugee ethos, which is to be hardworking, to become self-reliant, but also, very importantly, to contribute back to the host community that welcomed you. If you look at the contributions of refugees here in the United States, I mean, they give billions of dollars yearly in taxes, in money that goes towards the building of bridges and fire departments and schools and so forth, and all the things that we as Americans here living in the United States benefit from. So refugees have historically always contributed to their host communities, and I think this idea of refugees usurping resources and is an unfortunate trope that's simply not substantiated by facts. In terms of a particular story, I want to talk about Uganda, But I want to segue into it by telling you about somebody I met there as a way of discussing that country's sort of unique approach, and that takes into account some of the things that Michelle and I have been talking about, but also takes into account the idea that there are solutions out there that work not only for refugees, but for everyone else. I was in a place called Bidi, which is a small village in northern Uganda, that in a span of about 9 months had grown into one of the largest refugee settlements in the world, with over 250 million South Sudanese refugees living on the land. And I was talking to a local Ugandan farmer. His name was Yahya, who was 51 years old, and who had donated a plot of his family land to a family of South Sudanese refugees that were led by a man named Mike. And as it turned out, Yahya, the farmer, was once a refugee himself. And in fact, in the 1980s, back when he was a boy, when his family fled Uganda, they crossed the border into what is now Sudan, and they were taken in and looked after by Mike's family. And so now, decades later, there's a war in South Sudan, and now Mike is a refugee, and Yahya is sort of like returning the favor. And I always remember what he said to me. He said, "I understand his situation. He's like a brother to me." And I was so inspired by his example, and as I was by the rather progressive and innovative approach that Uganda has taken to managing refugee populations, which I think is a very positive story and maybe sets an example for other countries. If you go to speak with refugees in Uganda, you'll find something rather striking, namely that there are no refugee camps. In fact, within 3 days of arriving, refugees move to live in village-like settlements, and they live on land that's been allocated to them, essentially given to them, in a rather remarkable act of generosity and solidarity by individual and community landowners and by the government themselves, by the government itself. Refugees are free to live on the land, to cultivate that land and be less reliant on food from aid sources. They're free to build a home on the land. They're free to build a business on it. And they're free to leave the land and move about and to access local basic services like schools and health clinics, all of this side by side with local Ugandans. Now, if you know, people like Michelle who've traveled extensively will realize this is, you know, in stark contrast to where you visit refugee camps, where movement in and out of the camp is strictly regulated, and where the opportunities are very, very few, and where refugees live starkly apart from the local community and have little or no contact with it, and have little or no access to social and basic goods that are enjoyed by the local population. And what's unique and I think innovative about Uganda's approach is that it doesn't view refugees through a purely humanitarian lens. It acknowledges their resilience, their autonomy, their resourcefulness, and it understands that all parties are best served when refugees are incorporated into national development plans instead of being viewed as obstacles and impediments to them. So it treats refugees with dignity, and it views refugees as agents of growth. It links the influx of refugees to development in local villages. That benefits both refugees and the district's local population and makes for a more sustainable dynamic. The Ugandan farmer I met, for example, told me that 3 of his young kids didn't receive any education previously because the nearest school was too many miles away. But now, he told me, they attend a primary school that was built in the Bidi settlement that's home to some 250,000 Sudanese refugees. I met Ugandan and South Sudanese teachers that were teaching there side by side. And I met South Sudanese and Ugandan children that were learning there side by side. Local Ugandans now have better access to public infrastructure in areas that contain large numbers of refugees. They can seek medical care at health clinics that have been built to treat refugees, or they can use newly paved roads that were laid down to ease movement of aid agencies and supplies. And I just think, I just think it's uplifting to see a country like Uganda, a nation where 7 million people are living in absolute poverty, take the lead in this kind of very progressive, innovative approach that makes for a healthier dynamic between locals and refugees, and also allows refugees to reclaim some measure of dignity and self-sufficiency. I think it's an inspiring example, and I would hope that maybe more countries will follow.
Well, and indeed, it's an inspiring story. Never imagined, Uganda putting, actually, it's not a plan. That's how they did it organically. And then you see how refugees are treated in some other places, and the common perception that they all come to developed economies, which is not true. We know that.
Well, I think, including refugees communities where they have found safety is really the most effective way of enabling them to rebuild their lives and contribute to the countries that are hosting them. That means ensuring that refugees have the right to apply for jobs, that they can enroll in schools, that they have access to services like housing and healthcare, which is something that we are seeing in Uganda.
Yeah. Thank you. Mahroukh, your journey as a refugee is inspiring. Can you tell us more about the support systems that played a role in helping you achieve your current outcomes?
Thank you so much for sharing your good words. I would like to really highlight the invaluable support that I received from Talent Beyond Boundaries, which they have played a crucial role in helping me to leave Afghanistan and start a new life in UK. Their assistance was like a beacon in this darkness days. And in terms of community and social supports, I have been very fortunate that I have received very kindness and very acceptance from local community, and also supportive individuals in community where I live. In this city which I live, the council organized some events, and this provide the opportunity to engage in the community, building connection, and also establish a sense of belonging. Additionally, I myself is a bit social person, and I have a firm network within my workplace, and also it's fostering friendship and support, which is significant and which is make a very differences in integration process. As I am a very new refugee, it's 2 months I am here, and as we all know, education have been an instrument in equipping me with necessary skill and knowledge for self-reliance. As I am now working with Fragment, a company dedicated to support skilled worker mobility, I have received all comprehensive training related to my job. This has allowed me to integrate seamlessly into the team, and also contribute to the workplace and enjoy each moment of my professional life. Meanwhile, this all support that I receive from TBB, local community, and also educational programs, which have played a very significant role with current outcome which I have. And also at the end, I wish that everyone has the chance to choose where to live, and free from all this oppression, and with ability to pursue their all dreams. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, when it comes to host communities, public-private collaboration is essential. We all know that, for better outcomes for refugees and their host communities. Can you share examples of how such collaboration can make a difference and how employer communities can benefit from the unique skills, experiences, and perspectives brought by refugees?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Akbar. So I think when we talk about host communities, and Khaled has cited this example in Uganda, and we have talked about when there's also been very, very negative attitudes in other host communities towards refugees. So the question really is about, well, where is that coming from? Why do we have, sometimes really positive responses and sometimes really negative ones? And in my own work, what I have found is when humans don't actually know what is happening and they're not really informed about what is taking place, people start to make their own assumptions. So unfortunately, when people don't know what, that there's a new group of refugees that might have arrived into a community and they do not really have no knowledge of what's happening, people will make up their own stories. So unfortunately, those stories might look like, well, these people are going to take our jobs, they might be committing crimes, they're not going to integrate, they're not like us. And that's really unfortunate when that happens. When we look at other research that's been done around what we call contact theory, and contact theory is looking at when there's intergroup collaboration and community. So what might that look like? Well, when different groups of people are coming together and there are some sort of shared experience. It's simple things like, cultural events, playing sport. Sport's always a great one, that's sort of bringing different communities together. And people get that experience to actually see, okay, that refugee, they are like me. They actually have similar needs and they are actually very, very similar to me. So that always builds quite strong rapport in the host community. You asked me about the employer collaboration piece. If I turn to what we've been doing at Maximus for many years, it's not only about working with job seekers to put them into sustainable employment, we also work with the employer community. So we would have account managers that go out and speak with the employer community about looking at what are appropriate jobs, what are the benefits of hiring these people. So there's a lot of public education that is taking place during that process. Something that I also think is really quite important to point out is around long-term sustainable jobs versus short-term jobs. So what we do need to see is from the employer community is putting people in long-term jobs. When people are in short-term jobs and they're only, this could be only maybe a couple of months, that actually creates a lot of anxiety for people. People have been in such a limbo situation and now they're, maybe only got a couple of months worth of work and it actually starts to impact the whole family group and it's very unsettling. So what we need to be looking at with the employer community is around long-term jobs where a refugee can actually grow with that company and feel part of that. And from that they, it's long-term employment is actually one of the fastest ways in which refugees can actually integrate into a new society. And then if I was to take a few more examples, if I was to look at widening the lens here, what could be happening at more of a larger level? Well, where we can see that employers can work with, say, different industries around accreditation. Sometimes refugees find that despite the fact that they've got many skill sets, that their overseas qualifications are not recognised simply because they don't have the same qualifications on paper here in a new country. So it's working with different industry bodies to be able to recognise people's skill sets and what they're actually capable of. And then also, right now we're facing some major labour shortages globally, for example, healthcare workers. And where we can see, for example, groups like TBB that Mahroukh has been resettled through, we can see that we can be filling labour shortages gaps by actually putting refugees on these skilled migration programs. So for example, the healthcare sector, you could be looking at introducing, employer subsidies and incentives to be putting refugees into the healthcare sector. So there's some of the sort of the bigger picture pieces here that we can be doing in terms of when it comes to the employer element.
Thank you, Michelle. That was very helpful. Now, in conclusion, as we have run out of time, I want to thank our panelists for their contribution and for spotlighting the potential of refugees to contribute to their new societies and how to support them, more importantly. with the global refugee population, as Father John shared with us, now 103 million people, it is very crucial to implement relevant interventions that support their journey towards self-reliance. By addressing labor shortages, and we know that it's everywhere, particularly in sectors like healthcare, trained refugees can fill crucial gaps and drive economic progression. Embracing refugees as valuable contributors aligns with principles of fairness and compassion, fostering diverse and dynamic workforces. And in addition to compassion, fostering diversity and the rest of it, it makes economic sense. It's proven. There have been many studies that you can go and find, and you see how they contribute to their local communities. So we must continue advocating for integration, education, and equal opportunities, ensuring a future where every refugee can flourish and find a place to call home. Now, we'll open the floor for questions.
Okay, I can handle that. I'm closest to the audience. Do we have any questions?
I have one. So you mentioned earlier on that refugees potentially learn English quicker once they're actually integrated into a job. Is there anything you can do as I suppose, once they're on a program, do you support them afterwards when they're employed, or how does it actually work to make sure that they're
so you can also look at when they're learning English, you can look at on-the-job training as well. So people are learning English through that process, definitely. Yeah. Great. All right. Thanks, Emma. Anyone else?
Is there any way there is support, is any institution they are providing trainings?
Are there any?
They can enhance their skills.
Are there any institutions? So the question is, are there any institutions that are providing training to enhance their skills? I don't know, Mahroukh, do you want to take that question? Have you seen that much with TBB and your experiences where training has been offered to refugees?
Yeah, to be honest, in my home country, I never seen any training or this kind of opportunity. And even when those who that they wanted to, due to their circumstances, leave their countries, even there is like thousands of people they didn't even get the opportunity. And I was fortunate that I have received this opportunity from TBB, and even my friends, those who really talented and has the capacity to support, they have applied like many months back, but still they didn't receive any response. No, I don't think so. I didn't have the experience.
Yeah, it often lacks when it comes to getting training. I'm just going to the memory lane. My second supervisor in an office setting, I went to him with a question. He looked at me and said, "This is not on the job training." Period. But the world worked in a mysterious way. I became his manager 3 years later, and I told him that he would get all the job training that he needs.
Thanks, Akbar. Okay, I think we had more questions. Rob, did you have a question?
Yeah, just to the panellists, I just wonder, reflecting on their own experiences of being refugees, whether there was anything within that experience that they felt stood out in terms of support they were given. Because with such a large, as Khaled said, globally complex problem, I'm just wondering how people help, and therefore what support did they get in their journeys that was very helpful.
Yep, great. So I'm not sure if you could hear that one. So the question that was being asked about for for the three of you, as all coming from refugee backgrounds, can you recall experiences where some sort of support happened in your own personal journeys that really helped you along the way? So a story of like support, personal support, like is there a memory of that you could say and talk to that really helped?
I certainly could. I actually appreciate the gentleman asking that question, because it's something that has come up repeatedly over the last 2 years since the influx of newly arrived Afghan refugees in the United States, which has helped me think back on my own journey arriving in the United States as a 15-year-old, a family of 9, carrying nothing but suitcases of clothes and not a penny to our name, and resettling in a country where we didn't speak the language and where we were completely alien to the local culture and customs and so forth. It's important to realize that it's terribly disorienting to start life anew in a completely new environment, to have all the foundational structures of life stripped from you, to leave your community, to leave the people that you knew, to leave your language and your culture and your customs, and start fresh again. It's terribly disorienting, and it's very, very challenging. And I think people tend to underestimate how far a little help goes and how deeply appreciated it actually is. Speaking on the situation here in the United States, for example, I remember my own family when we arrived in the US, how bewildered we were by how to do even simple things, like how to enroll the kids in school, or how to get how to make an appointment at the Department of Motor Vehicles and get a license, how to apply for aid, how to make a doctor's appointment. And I do remember that members from the community, including a gentleman who had been hired by the house that we were renting, the landlord had hired a janitorial service to come and clean the house, and the lead janitor happened to be a pastor, and he helped my family. He took my father to apply for a job. He sort of talked us through some of the labyrinthian kind of processes of applying for aid and so forth. And I just think for the receiving community, it's just really important for them to remember that these are families that are terribly in a state of like a real flux and confusion, and any help you can give them is going to be remembered and deeply appreciated. I would suggest the local communities to talk to refugees, to talk to your schools, your local leaders, your congregations, your local community about issues that affect refugees, and in whatever way you have that you can afford to get involved in working with refugees, be it just helping a refugee child with homework, or showing a refugee family that's newly resettled in your area, how to do some rather ordinary things, like I said, applying for a job or a driver's license. So yeah, certainly there are examples from my own personal life that really illustrate just how far help from the local community can go.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions? No? Great. Okay, that's it. We do. It's okay.
All right. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Khaled regarding I think he mentioned somewhere about the refugees from the Myanmar. Refugees are over, I think, roughly 1 million or more. And I have known somewhere that they are mainly in Afghanistan and Malaysia, and I would like him to develop a little bit about their situation in Afghanistan regarding the current situation over there, and how is UN, processing the situation over there.
Okay, so Khaled, the question was for you. It was around. You could hear it? Yeah.
I could hear it.
Okay,
Miraculously.
Okay.
I don't need to be your interpreter.
Thank you anyway. No, I mean the situation in Afghanistan is deeply concerning, as I'm sure you know. We're looking at a country that is verging on the brink of economic collapse, where millions and millions of people don't know where their next meal will come from. Millions of people, to the tune of over 3 million people, are internally displaced inside the country. Over 5 million people, Afghans, nearly half of whom are children, are living as refugees or as asylum seekers or in refugee-like situations. So I think the situation is pretty severe. Afghanistan is one of the world's largest and most severe humanitarian crises today. 21% and almost 60% of the people who are displaced in Afghanistan, 21% are women, nearly 60% are children. And so, you know, if you look at the humanitarian situation, it's quite disconcerting. A record 28 million people. That's almost 2/3 of the entire population of the country, including over 11 million women and girls, are going to require humanitarian aid and protection assistance this year in 2023. And that's, you talked about the UN. The UN is obviously deeply involved. I have been a Goodwill Ambassador for the UNHCR since 2006, working with the UN Refugee Agency to advocate for refugees. And unfortunately, in Afghanistan, the Taliban have prohibited women from working in most non-governmental organizations, and recently extended the ban to women working in UN agencies, which has made the work of the UN exponentially more difficult, and has also made the work of my own private foundation inside Afghanistan very difficult. And it underlines the need for women to be given a meaningful space in Afghanistan, if Afghanistan is to find peace, if it is to foster sustainable development inside the country. Women and girls have to be able to enjoy all their rights, because without the full participation of women and girls, and I want to underline, in all aspects of public Afghan life, I think there's very little chance of achieving any kind of lasting peace, let alone meaningful stability and you know, economic development.
Sorry, please. I wanted to point out something. There is my question is particularly about the Myanmar refugees who are in Afghanistan.
Myanmar refugees.
I wish I could speak to that more intelligently, but given my limited engagement with that issue, I want to defer to someone who might know more about that issue than I do.
All right, thank you. That was all your question? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, I think we're almost on time. So Akbar, do you want to wrap up?
No, I think we wrapped it up again. Thanks again, you know, our panelists for joining us today, and you know, participants in Dubai. And let's all work together to make life better for other human beings, our refugees. That's an important mission.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you.